Everyone in my social circle knows that I've been smitten with Sophia since I was a kid. As her loyal follower for years, I'm well versed in her preferences and always rush to meet her needs. She likes black, so I gave her black stockings. She's interested in foreign languages, and I presented her with French polka dot socks. She loves flower arranging, and I offered her floral pattern thigh-high socks. I tried my best to please her wholeheartedly, never expecting that on our wedding day, she would jilt me and run abroad to save her first love. 20 years of growing up together as childhood sweethearts ended up as a joke. I was dressed in an 8-digit valued suit, surrounded by stockings worth billions, and I completed this grand yet desolate wedding alone. Just when everyone was waiting to see me make a fool of myself, I laughed the loudest. I thought to myself that there are plenty of women out there, and I could treat someone else well just as easily. But there's only one business empire. I not only coveted her, but I also highly valued the wealth behind her. The story begins. If you like it, remember to subscribe. Sophia's plane had taken off. I locked myself in the lounge and had a hard time squeezing out a single tear. My hot-tempered dad, Mark, was shouting curses outside the lounge. Sophia's father was also angrily dialing one phone number after another, vowing to catch Sophia as soon as she landed. There were 2 messages on my phone. One was from Sophia: James, wait for me to come back. I'll give you an explanation. The other was a photo of her. In the picture, she was hurrying towards the boarding gate, anxiously making a phone call. The mermaid-style dress she was wearing was the wedding dress that I and the designer had painstakingly refined the details of. The jewelry headdress I had carefully selected was hanging loosely on the ends of her hair. Her eyes and brows were gentle, and her eyes were full of love, as if she was softly coquettish to the person on the other end of the phone. Anyone who saw it would sigh that the man loved by her was really fortunate. I enlarged the photo and looked at it carefully for a while, filled with reluctance. But I had given her a chance. Since she had made a choice, she should be responsible for her decision. I washed my face, tidied up my appearance, put on my straight suit, and walked out of the lounge with my head held high. I smiled and faced the elders outside with different expressions, announcing that the wedding would proceed as planned. It was 3 days later when Sophia returned to the country. In those 72 hours, I became the well-deserved hot topic. Newspapers, tabloids, and self-media in the country were all discussing the fact that James, the eldest son of the James family, was jilted by the bride on the wedding day but still insisted on going through all the complicated wedding procedures alone. Some people lamented the cold-heartedness of the wealthy families, some felt indignant for me, and some gloated. Anyway, in the overwhelming reports, my name was ranked ahead of Sophia's for the first time. To show his apology to the James family, my father-in-law, Sophia's father, hosted a banquet to make amends. At the dinner table, the atmosphere gradually warmed up. Sophia's father raised his glass to me. James, this glass of wine is for you, son-in-law. You're truly Mark's good son. You made a decisive decision and considered the overall situation, preserving the face of our 2 families. It's the Sophia family that's sorry to you. Don't worry, I will definitely give you an explanation for this matter. I humbly raised my glass and was about to speak when the door of the banquet hall was pushed open, and Sophia walked in looking haggard. When my dad, Mark, saw her, his face instantly turned gloomy, and the glass he was holding in mid-air was put down heavily. The huge banquet hall fell silent immediately. Sophia's father glanced at my dad, gritted his teeth, and scolded Sophia, "Kneel down." Sophia walked step by step in front of my dad, lowered her head slightly, and said softly, "Dad, I was wrong about this matter." My dad snorted and didn't respond. However, the next second, Sophia put a document on the table, raised her chin, and said proudly, "But I also brought back the contract." This time I went to the United States as the daughter-in-law of the James family and signed a cooperation deal with the Thunder Group on behalf of the James family. The James family had been trying to win the cooperation with the Thunder Group for half a year. All the details had been finalized, but the Thunder Group had been reluctant to sign. The James family had made inquiries from many sources but couldn't find a breakthrough. My dad was so worried about this cooperation deal that his hair turned white. I have to say that Sophia's strategy of attacking the heart was really powerful. This contract was a great achievement for the James family. My dad was stuck with a breath in his throat. He didn't know whether to keep a straight face or greet Sophia with a smile. Sophia lowered her eyes, stood in front of my dad, slightly pursed her red lips, with an elegant posture and a calm expression. Sophia's father heaved a sigh of relief and took the lead in applauding. "Mark, what do you think? My daughter is not bad, is she? She helped you win over Thunder in one go. She should be rewarded." Led by Sophia's father, the people at the dinner table, after the initial awkwardness, also started to clap, and the atmosphere gradually became enthusiastic. But did Sophia really think she could easily turn the page after causing our James family such great embarrassment? I frowned, walked up to Sophia, and looked her up and down. Sophia, why are you still wearing the dress from the wedding day? Were you too busy taking care of Mr. David to change? Or is the wedding dress more convenient for you to take care of him? The banquet hall suddenly fell silent, and Sophia's smile froze on her face. I forced a smile and stepped forward, putting my arm around her shoulder to send her out. Okay. You go back and take a bath, change your clothes, and have a rest. Don't worry. I'm here. A loud table slapping sound came from behind. I didn't need to turn around to know it was my dad. Mark's voice rang out, "Stop. Don't go anywhere." In the stalemate, a thin figure rushed in from outside the door and stood between me and Sophia. Don't make things difficult for Sophia. It's my fault, all my fault. The person who came was the culprit who made Sophia jilt me, her first love, David. David bent over tremblingly to apologize, but his body lost its balance and he almost fell to the ground. In full view of everyone, Sophia pressed herself tightly against his body, held his arm, and helped him up, saying with a face full of distress, "Didn't I tell you to wait for me in the car? Why did you come up? Are you feeling unwell?" David's face was pale, his expression pained, but with a bit of a heroic, sacrifice look. He held Sophia's shoulder and said, "Sophia, don't quarrel with your father because of me. It's not worth it. I don't have much time left. I can't leave you with a mess." After saying just a few words, David coughed violently. Sophia frowned tightly, without saying a word, and struggled to help David out, not even looking at anyone present. "David, it's okay. I'll take you to the hospital." However, the next second, Sophia's father sternly said, "Sophia, you stop." Sophia's father was furious and shouted loudly, "If you dare to walk out of this door, everything of the Sophia family will have nothing to do with you." Sophia stopped, turned around, and looked coldly at her father, biting her lip and saying, "The thing I regret the most is that I couldn't stop you from sending David abroad back then. Do you think you can still control me like you did back then?" Sophia's father's face turned gloomy, but he couldn't say a word. My dad shook his head and said, "Old friend, it seems that you can no longer be the master of the Sophia family." Sophia looked at my dad, rolled her eyes, and said, "Uncle, I came back and didn't immediately take David to the hospital but came to find you and James." "Isn't this enough? Some words are better left unsaid." Sophia turned to me, her eyes cold. "James, I promised to marry you, and I did. I'm your wife now. You may be very proud, right? But don't expect anything in terms of feelings. You can never force it." After saying that, she helped David and walked out without looking back. David hung on her shoulder, turned his head, looked straight at me, and slightly raised the corner of his mouth. In full view of everyone, I angrily crushed the wineglass in my hand. Blood dripped drop by drop from between my fingers onto the pale tiles. Sophia and I grew up together as childhood sweethearts with a deep affection. I was her little follower since I was a kid. Whatever she liked, I learned. I had no hobbies of my own, her hobbies were mine. The businesses of our two families have been closely linked since our father's generation, intertwined with each other. So it was almost a foregone conclusion for Sophia and me to get married. The only accident was probably in the second year of high school when David received a school-funded quota and transferred to our class as a poor student. He was like a bright lamp in the storm, warm and tenacious, easily attracting Sophia's admiration. The girl's feelings had just sprouted but were nipped in the bud by Sophia's father. Even though Sophia strongly protested, David was still sent abroad, and she completely lost contact with him. Since then, she became cold, aloof, and taciturn. When she agreed to the marriage between our two families, I asked her, "If David comes back, how will you choose?" At that time, her eyes sparkled, and she looked at me with a flirtatious look, saying naively, "Those are all in the past. I was so young back then and didn't know what love was. I only want to be James's wife and can only be James's wife." That day, the kiss we shared still seemed to have a lingering warmth, but in a blink of an eye, things had changed. From childhood to adulthood, I've rarely lost my temper and lost control in front of others. Seeing me like this, my dad probably felt worse than if I had been killed. My mom quickly came over to help me deal with the wound, while my dad, regardless of the situation, got very angry at Sophia's father and then took me and left the table. Of course, I didn't forget to take the contract with Thunder. Sophia didn't look for me. The news about her and David still reached my ears through my intelligence team and my good friend Robert. David had cancer and didn't have much time left, but he refused to be hospitalized. He almost obsessively demanded to live in the wedding room that Sophia and I shared. Such an outrageous request, Sophia actually didn't refuse. Robert was so angry that he pointed at my nose in front of me and scolded, "James, don't you have any reaction? You've been cuckolded, and you're not angry?" I laughed. Angry? I stopped my work, put my hand on my heart, closed my eyes and felt for a while. I was a little sad, but not much. Seeing Robert almost exploding with anger, I smiled and patted him on the shoulder and said, "The contract with Thunder has reached the first payment node. I have to keep an eye on it. Money is 100 times more important than a woman, brother." Robert spat at me fiercely and scolded, "Come on, James. You're not short of money. The James family and the Sophia family can shake the entire business circle with a stomp of their feet." Seeing that he was about to faint with anger, I thought about it and gave him a reassurance. "Don't worry. This isn't over. David should come to me soon." As I expected, seeing that I didn't react to his provocation, David couldn't hold back and came to me. Sitting in the coffee shop downstairs of the James family building, I carefully looked at him and smiled. "Mr. David, you look really good. It seems that my wife has taken good care of you." David stretched his hand in front of me. "Mr. James, does this look familiar?" The heirloom finger ring of the Sophia family. If I remember correctly, the Sophia family entrusted it to you on the day of your engagement. You wrapped it layer by layer and collected it in the cabinet. It's so funny. The thing you cherish like a treasure is being played with by me at will. You're just relying on your background to monopolize Sophia. Besides that, you have nothing. And I, except for your wealth and glory, have everything you don't have. Looking at David's arrogant appearance, I somehow found it very funny. "Mr. David, congratulations on your dream coming true. There's a detail you may not have noticed, but I want to remind you." I paused and continued. "Sophia's father sent you abroad. For so many years, you tried every means to contact Sophia but couldn't. Guess who happened to reveal the news of our wedding to you just before my wedding with Sophia? And why could you suddenly get through to Sophia's phone number, which you couldn't reach for 10 years? David was stunned. He stared at me with wide eyes, unbelieving, and said in a daze, "It can't be you, right? Are you crazy?" I leaned back on the chair, looked at him with a smile, and didn't speak. David looked at me for a long time, and his eyes began to flicker. He panicked and asked, "James, what on earth is your purpose?" I laughed as if I had heard the funniest joke and replied indifferently, "Mr. David, do you still need to ask this question? Of course, I want to defend my family and keep my beloved wife. I chased Sophia for more than 20 years to marry her. How could I give her to you? You still need to work harder." David was furious. He picked up the coffee cup on the table and wanted to throw it at me. I took out a document and handed it to him. When he saw the words on the document, David's face instantly turned pale, and he stammered, You, how do you have this?" I smiled, put on my coat, and stood up. "Mr. David, I won't let you two go free. Let's each rely on our own abilities." A few days later, I was invited to the 20-year-old birthday party of William, the youngest son of the William family. As soon as I entered, I happened to see William punch David in the face. With a bang, half of David's face visibly swelled up. William was obviously furious. He grabbed David's collar, gave it a hard tug, and David fell clumsily to the floor. William was about to step forward again when Sophia's voice came over. "William, why are you hitting him?" William stopped, turned his head to look at Sophia, his eyes full of anger. He stretched out his hand to straighten his high-end custom-made suit, on which a row of buttons had been torn off, and gritted his teeth and said, "Sophia, I invited you to my birthday party, and you brought such a person to ruin my event?" Obviously, it was David's doing. William is the youngest son of the William family and has 3 older sisters. The family had a child late in life, and William has been doted on since childhood. William started acting at the age of 16 and had won all the major awards in the entertainment industry by the age of 20. He is the youngest and most popular movie emperor. When has he ever suffered such humiliation? Before Sophia could speak, David got up from the ground, pushed William away, and cursed, "Stay away from my woman. You look so casual," and even poured Sophia alcohol. "We're all men. Who doesn't know what you're thinking?" William said speechlessly, "Are you crazy?" I toasted everyone. David completely ignored what he said and just turned to Sophia with a grief-stricken face, with his bruised face, and said, "Sophia, I understand. Not only did I fail to protect you, but I also caused you trouble. I don't have a prominent family background, and I don't have time to make a career for myself like William. I deserve everything I've suffered. I understand." Sophia was so distressed that she immediately threw herself into his arms, looking like a little bird, and comforted him. "Silly, you'll always be the warmest harbor in my heart." David looked at her with doting eyes and said, "Really? I also want to act like William, win the Movie Emperor Award, drive a luxury car, and live in a mansion. Will you support me, Sophia?" Sophia immediately made a phone call and arranged to start a film company to support David. I watched the farce in the distance and just found it ridiculous. People are ultimately trapped by the things they couldn't get when they were young. The once proud swan was so easily being dragged down from the altar by David. Sophia gradually became a joke in the social circle. Of course, I, the wronged husband, was no exception. David firmly occupied her life. He was present at every dinner party and event she attended. After David went crazy a few times, all the opposite sex in the circle rationally kept a distance from Sophia. The next time I saw Sophia was when our two families jointly signed a major project of the municipal government and had to attend the press conference hosted by the municipal government. The elders had gradually stepped back, and as the leaders of the groups, Sophia and I were duty-bound to attend such events. While waiting, I was a little surprised to see that there was no one around. Sophia, Mr. David didn't accompany you here today? Sophia looked at me, and a hint of obscurity flashed in her eyes. She bit her lip and said, "He's filming on the set." A few months after Sophia told me not to expect her feelings, she actually smiled at me and said seriously, "Today's event is very important. Of course, I should accompany my husband here." I stepped back 2 steps to keep an appropriate distance from her. "Miss Sophia, in such an occasion, it's more appropriate for you to call me Mr. James." Sophia's smile froze on her face. She took a step forward and said with difficulty, "James." Just then, the host invited the guests to enter the venue. I ignored the emotion in Sophia's eyes that I couldn't quite understand, nodded at her, and turned to walk into the hall. The press conference was broadcast live. After taking my seat, I suddenly thought of a question and turned to confirm with Sophia, who was sitting on my right. "Ms. Sophia, does Mr. David know that we'll be attending this event together?" The host was speaking loudly. To hear me clearly, Sophia tilted her head slightly in my direction. As soon as I finished speaking, Sophia's phone on the table started vibrating. The host announced the official start of the press conference, and the city leader began to give a speech. Sophia hesitated for a second, then reached out and hung up the phone. The city leader's speech lasted for 5 minutes, and Sophia's phone vibrated wildly for those 5 minutes. I looked at the name David flashing on the screen, turned to Sophia, and smiled. "Your relationship is really enviable." Sophia pursed her lips and said nothing. After the speech, it was the turn for the winning enterprises to make statements. The live broadcast camera focused on me. I stood up, but after sitting for too long, my blood circulation was poor, and my legs were numb. I tilted slightly in Sophia's direction. Sophia instinctively got up to support me, and my arm was tightly held by her. I lowered my head and patted her hand, smiling. "Thank you, Ms. Sophia." Sophia was stunned and stared blankly at me until I smiled and withdrew my hand. Before I could finish reciting my statement, suddenly a staff member rushed in and whispered something in the host's ear. The host quickly reported to the city leader, and after getting the leader's approval, the screen on site was turned on to connect to the signal. David's figure appeared on the screen, standing on the rooftop. "Sophia, why didn't you answer my call? Why did you go to James? James was smiling at you so happily. What did you say to him? Why? Why do you have to force me to use this way to make you see me?" The camera focused on Sophia. She stood up, stared fixedly at the screen, and replied, "David, I didn't say anything. I had no choice but to come today. Don't be impulsive. Come down, okay?" David completely lost his mind. Overwhelmed with grief and indignation, he shouted at the top of his voice, "I don't believe it. You're the daughter of the Sophia family. Who can force you to do something you don't want to do? You just wanted to see James, right? Since we got married, you've been with me all the time. Now you suddenly want to see him. You must be thinking about him, right? You even reached out to support him and let him touch your hand. Do you have no sense of shame?" Sophia was extremely wronged, and her voice was full of pleading. "David, I really didn't. Come down first. I'll go back to you right now, okay?" David was so excited that his voice broke, yelling, "No way. Unless you prove it to me. Yes, go and slap James. As long as you do that, I'll believe you haven't betrayed me." Sophia looked at the city leader sitting next to her. The leader's face was as black as the bottom of a pot, not even giving her a sidelong glance. Sophia finally broke down and shouted hysterically, "David, stop going crazy." As soon as she said this, David went berserk. He rushed down from the rooftop, got into his car, and then charged into the crowd. There were many onlookers at the scene, and they had no time to dodge. We could only watch helplessly through the screen as some people were knocked to the ground. David didn't stop and drove away directly. When we arrived at the scene, the police and ambulances were already there. The scene was in chaos, with injured people lying all over the ground, bloodstained and horrifying. I made a prompt decision to arrange for the staff to open all the doors of the RVs and help the slightly injured people into the RVs to rest. While I was busy, I heard Sophia's phone ring. David's shrill voice reached my ears. "Sophia, help me. The car hit a tree. I'm stuck, and I'm bleeding a lot. I want to see you." I looked back. Sophia was busy arranging the injured, so she turned on the speaker. Hearing David's words, she immediately stood up and asked nervously, "David, where are you? I'll come to you right away." With that, she started to walk out. I sighed and called out to her from behind, "Sophia, with such a big incident happening, you can't leave. The film company is a subsidiary of the Sophia family. If the follow-up resettlement work is not done well, it will seriously affect the image of the Sophia family. You must stay and deal with the aftermath." Perhaps hearing my voice, David became even more excited and continued to play the victim. "Sophia, I may never see you again. I love you. If I die like this, please forget me." Sophia hesitated. Her eyes were full of pain and struggle. After a moment, she tightly pursed her lips, grabbed my sleeve, and choked, "James, I beg you. Please take care of this, okay? David is in the late stage of cancer. He doesn't have long to live. I will definitely pay you back for what I owe you." Before I could respond, Sophia turned to leave. I smiled and said, "Sophia, speaking of which, do you know what my nickname Grainbuds means?" She paused for a moment. Maybe she heard it, maybe not, but she didn't look back and just walked away. I sighed and said to myself, Grainbuds is one of the 24 solar terms in China, which means that crops begin to ripen, and the harvest season is coming. This was an extremely bad mass incident. Sophia's act of deserting the scene was filmed by passers-by and spread on the internet, adding insult to injury to the Sophia family, which was already in the center of public opinion. I worked around the clock for 48 hours. As Sophia's husband and the representative of the two families, I took charge of the overall situation, comforted the injured, and came up with a practical compensation plan. When I finished dealing with everything and dragged my tired body out of the Sophia family building, I was startled by the figure standing at the door. It was Sophia. Her eyes were red, her face was covered with tears, and she seemed to be on the verge of breaking down at any moment. She choked, "James." When she opened her mouth, her hoarse voice made it almost impossible for me to hear what she was saying. She continued, "James, David was arrested, and my dad was so angry that he had a heart attack. He's still in the ICU being rescued." I looked up at the sky. The sky was already showing a faint glow of dawn, and a ray of morning glow was struggling to pierce the darkness, as if it didn't notice Sophia's tragic situation at all. I smiled at her and said something rather random, "Sophia, look, the sky is getting bright." Sophia's father finally regained consciousness. Sophia and I rushed to the hospital together. When Sophia's father woke up, half of his hair had turned white. When he saw Sophia, he closed his eyes in disappointment and turned his head to the side. Sophia's mother's eyes were swollen like walnuts from crying. She got up, took my hand, and tears streamed down her face again. Before Sophia could speak, her phone rang. She hesitated for a moment and turned on the speaker. A voice came from the other side. "Hello, is this Miss Sophia? Mr. David is detained in our detention center. He insists on seeing you." After we refused his request according to the regulations, he bit his tongue and tried to commit suicide. We found out in time, and Mr. David only suffered minor injuries. Before the person on the other end could finish speaking, Sophia had already turned around and rushed towards the door. Sophia's mother shouted, "Sophia, come back here." As she said this, Sophia's mother burst into tears. Sophia hesitated for a moment, then opened the door and walked out without looking back. Sophia's father closed his eyes in pain, and a tear rolled down from the corner of his eye. I stood there, and the atmosphere was extremely awkward. Just as I was hesitating whether to leave, Sophia's father's special assistant rushed in, out of breath. "Chairman, something bad has happened." I reflexively grabbed him and asked, "Assistant Joseph, what's going on? Speak slowly." Assistant Joseph was so out of breath that he couldn't speak for a moment as he looked at the chairman lying on the hospital bed, his face ashen. Sophia's father waved his hand and said, "It's okay. Speak." Only then did Assistant Joseph say cautiously, "We just received a notice from the municipal government. They are very dissatisfied with Sophia's performance in this incident and require the Sophia family to withdraw from this project or consider replacing the general manager." Sophia's mother stood up in a panic. Sophia's father, lying on the hospital bed, gasped for breath, and the blood pressure monitor beside the bed beeped frantically. I quickly pressed the service bell by the bed, but before the nurse arrived, Sophia's father couldn't catch his breath and fainted. Sophia's father had a stroke. Fortunately, he was rescued in time and his life was saved, but he was left paralyzed on one side of his body and would have to spend the rest of his life in bed. When Sophia received the news and rushed back from the detention center, what awaited her was the notice that the group had decided to replace the general manager, and the person to take over was me. She stood outside her father's hospital room for several days, but her father didn't want to see her. One late night, after finishing my work, I was so tired that I decided to sleep in the office for the night. Just as I turned off the lights, my phone started vibrating. It was Sophia calling. After a moment of hesitation, I answered the phone and asked, "Sophia?" The receiver was quiet. I called out again, "Sophia?" Sophia must have been crying. Her voice spread like mist in the late night air. "James, I brought back the finger ring and put it back in its original place. It's been so many days. Why haven't you come back to get it?" Afraid of hurting her feelings, I carefully chose my words and replied, "Sophia, you know that I've never used things that others have used since I was a child." She was silent for a long time. Then I heard her laugh self-deprecatingly and ask in a sad tone, "Including people, right?" I didn't know how to answer, so I just replied with a hum. It was late at night. Perhaps because I didn't hang up the phone, it gave her a chance to vent her pent-up feelings. Sophia laughed and cried on the phone, "James, David lied to me. He didn't have cancer at all. He just used the cancer to deceive my sympathy. No wonder he refused to go to the hospital and insisted on staying at home. It was only when he had a physical examination in the detention center that I found out he wasn't sick at all, not at all." At the most emotional part, Sophia sobbed, "James, I regret it so much. I hated my dad for more than 10 years because of such a person. I missed our wedding for him and hurt your heart. James, after going through all this, I finally realized that in this world, only you are truly good to me." As Sophia spoke, I listened quietly. The gentle evening breeze blew in through the window. In a trance, I remembered that year when David was sent abroad by Sophia's father. Sophia took her anger out on me, losing her temper at me at every turn. But I was worried about Sophia. Every night when she got drunk in the bar with her girlfriends, I would go to find her and take her home. The evening breeze that night was as gentle as it was tonight. Standing outside the private room, I heard Sophia's girlfriend ask her, "Sophia, James looks so pitiful running around the world looking for you every day. You might as well make it clear to him. Don't keep stringing him along and let him give up." With such a gentle evening breeze, how did Sophia answer? Sophia said, "If it weren't for the marriage with James, David wouldn't have been treated so unfairly. David is suffering alone abroad. Why should James be so complacent? Not only will I marry him, but I'll also take over the James family and make him a joke to the world." I came back to my senses from my memories. Sophia stopped making noise. She should have fallen asleep. Her sobbing breathing came through the receiver. I smiled softly. "Sophia, James won't wait for you forever. James has already moved on a long way." On a sunny afternoon, William and I went to the detention center to visit David. The double torture of his body and mind had made him extremely haggard. He looked more like an oil lamp on the verge of being extinguished by a rainstorm. Through the thick bullet-proof glass, David stared at me fiercely, his eyes full of hatred. He gritted his teeth and said, "James, are you here to show off your victory?" I smiled softly. "David, do you still think I consider you an opponent to this day? You're just a pawn." I turned on my phone and showed him the photo of Sophia in a mermaid-style dress at the boarding gate. My people were able to take a photo of Sophia boarding the plane. If I wanted to, I could have stopped her. That day was also the last chance I gave her. David seemed to be struck by something. He finally realized, "You deliberately leaked the news of your marriage to me? You deliberately lured me back and made me the culprit who destroyed everything?" He stood up excitedly, slapped the glass hard, and roared, "You're crazy. You crazy person. Don't you love Sophia? What on earth do you want to do?" He was so emotional that when he saw William standing behind me, he cursed at William as well, "And you too. If it weren't for you provoking me, why would I want to be a movie emperor? If it weren't for the entertainment industry thing, there wouldn't have been so many people gathered there. I wouldn't have committed a crime, wouldn't have been locked up, and Sophia wouldn't have found out that I was faking my illness. You two have ruined my happy life, ruined it." I said somewhat helplessly, "Why do you still think my target is Sophia to this day?" "My target has always been the Sophia family." David was held down on the chair by the prison guards, still cursing. "What does that have to do with me? Your rich people's games, what do they have to do with me? Why drag me into it?" I stood up, stared into his eyes, and said, "When you shamelessly insisted on living in my wedding room and took my finger ring without asking, why didn't you think about why you were getting involved in the rich people's games?" David broke free from the prison guards, rushed to the glass, and roared, "James, you wait. I will definitely tell Sophia, definitely. I took 2 steps back, waved at him with a smile, hung up the phone, and turned to leave. On the way back, William asked me, "How were you so sure that Sophia and David would fall into the traps I set for them one by one?" I thought for a while and said to him, "In life, people can't escape their desires. Sophia has had a smooth life, and David is her only setback. She will definitely be trapped. And David, he didn't give up in the past 10+ years abroad and tried every means to contact Sophia. As long as he was given hope, he would be out of control and hold on to Sophia like a life-saving straw until he dragged both of them into the abyss." We both fell silent. We both understood that we were also in the game ourselves. With the support of our fathers, I took over the Sophia family and made a smooth transition. The affairs of the two groups were complex. After many rounds of argumentation, we came up with a feasible plan. After obtaining the consent of the shareholders, the Sophia family group and the James family group were officially merged. The two once independent business giants finally became an unshakable behemoth in my hands. The group was thriving under my management, while Sophia lost all her luster. She stayed in the wedding room that she and I shared every day, researching the dishes I liked and asking me if I would come home for dinner. I never went back to that so-called home again. Days passed peacefully until David was released from prison. The final blow came. Sophia rushed into my office with David. Her eyes were red, and she seemed on the verge of collapse at any moment. She stood in front of me, her hands trembling as she tried to reach out and pull me, joking, "James, tell me what David said isn't true." David held his head high triumphantly. Under Sophia's expectant gaze, I nodded and replied, "What David said should be true, if he didn't exaggerate." Sophia took 2 steps back. David tried to hug her, but she slapped his hand away. She looked at me blankly. "James, was it all fake? The years we spent together, the days when you did whatever I liked, the times when you stood in front of me to protect me, were they all fake? When you said you wanted to marry me, you looked so happy. Could everything be fake? I thought you were the only one who treated me wholeheartedly. Why are you treating me like this too?" I didn't answer her series of questions. Instead, I took out a document from the filing cabinet behind me and placed it in front of her. "Sophia, I think this document can give you the answer." Sophia picked up the document with trembling hands. After seeing the content, cold sweat rolled down her cheeks. I motioned for David to help her sit on the sofa, made her a cup of coffee, and placed it beside her. "Sophia, let's be straightforward. The James family has exhausted all the resources of the entire group but still couldn't secure the cooperation deal with Thunder, and we couldn't find any way to break through. The president of Thunder is your friend from your time studying in the US. You, at the cost of some other deal between the Sophia family and her, asked her to put the cooperation with the James family on hold indefinitely. Your goal was to bring down the James family. Am I right?" I looked at David, who was standing there looking confused, and smiled. "Speaking of which, I should thank Mr. David. When you learned that Mr. David was seriously ill, you couldn't wait to go abroad to see him, even absenteeing from our wedding. As a result, you had to produce the contract with Thunder to calm my dad's anger. I know David is your first love, but it was Sophia's father who separated you two. I was just a teenager back then, always looking out for you like an elder brother. I didn't do anything wrong. But you took out all your grievances of being unable to resist Sophia's father on me and the James family. I treated you with all my heart. What about you? Every step was a calculation. If you didn't love me, why did you marry me? Because you needed the support of the James family. Now, in a way, I've fulfilled your dream. The two families have been merged into one in my hands, and we're still husband and wife. So, in a sense, you've achieved your dream, right, Sophia?" Sophia looked at me with red eyes. "You clearly don't love me, and you know I was calculating against you. Why did you marry me?" I looked at her in surprise, as if she were a stranger. "Sophia, is that a question you should be asking? You becoming the daughter-in-law of my James family was the biggest help in completing my entire plan." Sophia was silent for a very long time, so long that I almost lost patience. Finally, she stood up, didn't say a word, and walked step by step towards the door. With her hand on the doorknob, she turned back and said word by word, "James, I'll take back everything that belongs to me." In the following days, Sophia made a lot of efforts, but all of them failed. The two groups had already merged. She struggled for 2 years, but aside from a small amount of dry shares that could earn her some dividends, she had almost no power. Repeatedly being turned away completely wore down Sophia's spirit. Eventually, she became the kind of rich young lady she used to hate the most, who only went clubbing, danced at discos, and partied every night. On my 25th birthday, Robert and William took the lead in inviting the second-generation people in the circle to a carnival. I lounged on the sofa, letting them laugh and make noise. Robert couldn't stand it anymore and brought over 10 young models. Standing in front of me, he forced me to choose one, and with a big grin, he leaned in and said, "2 are okay, or even 3. I casually scanned them with half-closed eyes and randomly pointed at one. Horror. The young model crouched in front of me, lowered her head, and timidly called me Mr. James. The girl had a pure face and a graceful figure. Leaning against me, her hands massaged me with just the right amount of pressure. I closed my eyes in comfort, and time seemed to stand still. Until Sophia's angry voice came. "James, don't forget, I'm still your wife." The young model seemed startled, and her hands froze. I patted her hand, indicating for her to continue. Opening my eyes, facing Sophia's almost murderous gaze, I couldn't help but laugh. "Sophia, I promised to marry you, and I did. You're already my wife. You should be happy, right? But when it comes to feelings, I advise you not to expect too much. You can never force it." Laughter rang out around us. I closed my eyes slightly, as if seeing the boy who had followed Sophia around eagerly more than 10 years ago finally stop and smile at me. This story has come to an end. If you enjoyed it, remember to like it and share it with your friends. This is the greatest support for me.